Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law News Network. I'm Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us today. A lot to cover today, but first we have to start off with anything that you might have missed last night because we do have some breaking news in the Jeffrey Willis case for anybody who missed it. Aaron Keller talked about it last night and we covered it. Jeffrey Willis, for anybody who's been following that case, he was found guilty in the first-degree murder of Rebekah BLETSCH, and he was also found guilty of felony firearms. The jury only deliberated for 90 minutes, which gives off the impression that they made the decision in this case pretty quickly before they even went into deliberations. And we're going to break down why that case was so strong against Mr. Willis. Remember, he was now convicted of shooting Rebekah BLETSCH several times in the head alongside Automobile Road in rural Muskegon County, Michigan on June 29, 2014. It was believed that she was jogging at the time, and the motive that was put forth by the prosecution was that Willis did this to kidnap, sexually assault, and eventually kill BLETSCH, as he did in the past. And what am I talking about? Well, he has also been charged with the disappearance and murder of Jessica Haringa. There she is right there. And he has also been charged with the attempted abduction of a 16-year-old girl. Those two separate charges are going to have their own separate trials. He's going to face trials for those separate charges, but those two incidents were also brought into this case. And the prosecution did a magnificent job, in my opinion, of really tying in all those separate events and trying to show that Mr. Willis has a pattern of being a sexual predator against women. And in the end, it was too much for the jury to take, and they ended up convicting him. We're going to talk about that case soon. But I also want to talk about the main case that we will be focusing on today. This is the Adam Matos case out of Pasco County, Florida. We believe it's going to start at around 9:30 a.m. today. Jury has been selected in this case. Matos has been accused of brutally murdering his ex-girlfriend Megan Brown, her boyfriend Nicholas Leonard, and her two parents Gregory and Margaret Brown. Now, Megan was also the mother of Matos' son, a 4-year-old at the time this murder took place. If he is convicted, he does face the death penalty. This case has so many different factors to it, so many unusual facts, and from what we see, we don't know any of the evidence as of yet, but what we've seen so far from media reports, the prosecution is building quite the case against Mr. Matos. So we're going to talk about that as well, but I also have to let you know that there's one other case we are following here on Law News Network. It is the case of Luis Toledo, this 35-year-old man out of Florida, another case out of Florida. He has been convicted. We saw it last week. We were covering this trial. He has been convicted of second-degree murder in the killing of his wife, Yesenia Suarez, and 2 counts of first-degree murder in the killing of her 2 children, Talia, who was 9 years old, and Michael, who was 8 years old. It's really disturbing to say, but as we know, the bodies have never been found. However, despite that fact, the jury was able to convict him of all 3 counts, as well as a count of tampering with evidence. Now it becomes the question of whether Mr. Toledo should be sentenced to death. That is for a jury to decide, and that is the penalty phase we're in right now. We saw some interesting testimony yesterday from a Dr. Joseph Wu, who was testifying about the brain activity of Mr. Toledo, that Mr. Toledo suffered numerous traumatic head injuries, that he suffered from seizures, and this resulted in a decrease in his frontal lobe activity, which related to having a difficulty of impulse control and aggressiveness. The defense is trying to show that Mr. Toledo, you can't sentence him to death. It would not be fair. He had a mental deficiency, and therefore he couldn't control his actions. Doesn't mean he's justified in what he did. No, that's already been decided. He's been convicted. But it's not just, it's not right, it's not fair for him to be sentenced to death. Well, that is also going to be an issue we hopefully can talk about today. But in the meantime, we want to focus on the Matos case as well as all these other cases. And here to help me talk about it, I have with us attorney Christi Kunzig. Christi, thanks for joining us here on Law News Network.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's start with Adam Matos, okay? We have so much to digest with this case, but I want to talk about the jury, okay? The jury, it took a while for them to find a jury. The judge even admonished the attorneys that it was taking some time for them to get a jury. If you're the prosecution in this kind of case, what kind of jury do you want? And be prepared, because I'm also going to ask you what the defense would want. So if you're the prosecution, what kind of jury do you want?
Of course. I think the prosecution is going to have an easy time picking a jury here because, like you said before, the facts really do seem to be on their side from what we know so far. So I think that really you're looking for someone who's going to be open-minded and may consider giving the death penalty. I think that as far as the main trial goes, they're not going to be concerned. It's more of after for the sentencing. are you going to find someone who's going to be able to say, yes, we're going to subject him to the death penalty, or you can have a problem where people maybe want to just say, okay, life in prison without parole is okay.
Yeah, and I think given the nature, the brutality of this crime, I wonder if in jury selection you try to ask for jurors that are you comfortable seeing certain crime scene photos? Would that affect your decision once you see the photos? Would you automatically think that the defendant is guilty? Crafting questions in that way, because this is a brutal quadruple homicide where people were shot in the head, shot in the torso. There was asphyxiation in one case, blunt force trauma to the head. This is pretty gruesome, and the bodies were decomposed. So I wonder if you're trying to find, well, for the prosecution, you would maybe want those kind of jurors. But at the same time, if you're the defense, what kind of jurors would you want? Because people that are easily swayed by those graphic nature of the crime or photos, you don't want those kind of jurors.
I think the defense is going to focus on finding people who, no matter what you've done, how gruesome the crime is, think that life in prison would be sufficient, and they're not going to want to sentence you to death. For religious reasons, for any reason that you can think of, or maybe just that's just your own opinion that you don't want the death penalty, you think it's unconstitutional, doesn't matter. That's the kind of juror that the defense is going to want, because at this point it's not about getting him off the hook. It's about getting him to stay alive and in prison.
Christi, we talked about this in the break. We have to bring it up. Jurors are not only swayed by that. Explain to our viewers what else they might be swayed by.
Sure. So in some situations, they are swayed by the defendant himself, where in this case, one of the jurors said she would not be able to be unbiased because she found the defendant too attractive, which I have to say was great, because I really thought he looked more like one of those. I thought he could be cast in the live action Lion King that's coming out. He looked like one of the little characters that followed Scar around, one of the hyenas. Or,
no, I was saying that I felt like he looked like he could be actually cast in the Adam Matos made-for-TV movie. But we'll and listening to all these trials, I don't think I've ever heard someone who's biased by the defendant's looks. Let's actually get into the meat of this case, the actual evidence that we have, or at least that we think that we have. There were statements that Megan, again, this is the ex-girlfriend she's one of the victims of Matos. She had called deputies to the residence on August 28th. But again, that date is important, guys, because August 28th is the last time anyone heard from any of these victims. So she called deputies to her residence on August 28th, and she said that Matos pushed her against a wall and held a knife against her throat. She even expressed her fears at one point to her boss, James Sigler, who said that she didn't show up to work on August 29th. He told deputies that she was afraid and believed that Matos was going to murder her. Another person, Megan Brown's close friend, Tony Carlson, said the victim worried about going to work because she feared that Matos would make off with their 4-year-old son. Megan said Matos was acting crazy and she had never seen him act like that. These statements that are allegedly made by the victim, these are crucial. You have to bring these in, and what kind of impact would they have?
They would have a tremendous impact on the jury, and they would go a long way towards showing premeditation, because these are the last statements she made, and she's saying, I have a feeling like he's going to kill me, he's acting crazy, he's being erratic, he even threatened me, had a knife, he only left because our son woke up, and then that kind of scared him away. Plus, he called her 200 times that same day. After he left, that was at 6 a.m., I think, that he threatened her with the knife, and then called her and her mom 200 times between 6 a.m. and that afternoon. So I think the jury is going to really look at this and say, okay, she had a feeling, he was acting crazy, and he was thinking about it. He was obviously being erratic, calling incessantly, and maybe that goes toward his state of mind where he's like, okay, I'm losing it, and I'm going to kill this person.
But if you're the defense and you know this is going to be brought forward, how do you try to fight against that? Because this is pretty bad.
It is pretty bad, and they're definitely going to try to keep it out. They have the potential argument that it is not a winning argument, but they may try to say, well, hearsay. But then, of course, we have all the exceptions to hearsay. So I don't think they'll be successful in keeping them out, but they'll definitely make an effort to try and get those out, off the record.
I want to focus now on his behavior. His behavior around this time, particularly after this August 28th date. A neighbor claimed that on August 29th, so again, this is the day after, no one heard from them, between midnight and 1 a.m., he saw Matos outside the homes, sweating and out of breath. Later, he said that they talked about, on September 2nd, he had a conversation with Matos, and they talked about the victims. Again, this neighbor didn't know that they were victims yet. But Matos claimed that the victims had flown out to West Virginia. That's a lie. Unless,
Right.
unless they can show he actually didn't know where they were, which I'm not sure how they're going to do. Again, we don't know anything yet. The case hasn't started. It's going to begin at 9:30, but what do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a pretty bad statement for him. If the neighbor comes in and testifies, there's no reason for him to be living at this house, not knowing where any of the people who are supposed to be living there are, and then to say out of nowhere that they flew to West Virginia and all their cars are still here because they took a cab. This is just an extravagant lie that there's no reason to lie unless you're covering up something.
Christi, in your opinion, in your experience, I've seen this countless times. When defendants lie, now, I know that the defense tries to craft it in certain ways. We saw cases where defendants lied because the victim is somebody they had a relationship with, and they lied because they were actually cheating on them. So their lies were to cover up an affair at the time. They didn't want to tell police. They didn't want to tell the truth. Maybe they were leading a secret life. But in my experience, when a defendant lies and that is brought to the jury's attention, that creates a serious issue for them moving forward. And I have to think that that is a big problem for him if, in fact, it can be shown that he was lying here.
It definitely does create a problem because now you have no credibility with the jury, so they're not going to believe anything you say because you've already lied, and now you're trying to stick with that lie. And this is one that I'm not really sure how you're going to say, oh, well, he lied because. It's not like he was trying to cover up an affair. He's living in a house where these 4 people should be and for some reason aren't. And so instead of being concerned about their whereabouts, he's lying and saying that they're in West Virginia.
Let's talk more about what he's been up to. Another neighbor, Sharon Mann, said she saw, and guys, I'm sorry I'm teasing this out. I mean, I'm sure you're going to see it. I'm giving away the spoilers of this case. But another neighbor, Sharon Mann, said she saw a man fitting the description of Matos, spraying water in the garage and sweeping outside of a side door on September 3rd, 2014. Again, only a few days after this, August 28th. A behavior that it's going to be hard for the defense to explain away. What do you make of that?
Not just his behavior, but also the fact that she spotted him there on that date, because according to his interview with Tampa Bay Times, he said the last time he was ever at that location was on the morning of the 28th at 6 a.m. when they had their altercation. She was alive and he left, and that's pretty much the end of it. So the fact that we have witnesses placing him at the scene after that date, that's really a problem.
Christi, thank you. We're going to have to follow this. Stick with us because we want to
Okay.
talk more about this case. But in the meantime, we do have our live feed in the Matos case, so we're going to bring it back in a bit. Again, this is the case out of Pasco County, Florida, and Adam Matos has been accused of brutally murdering his ex-girlfriend Megan Brown, her boyfriend Nicholas Leonard, and her parents Gregory and Margaret Brown. Megan was the mother of Matos' 4-year-old son. He does face the death penalty if he's convicted, and now it's time to watch the live trial right now.